Have you ever walked into a room and said nothing, yet the atmosphere shifted? A single glance from you unsettles someone. A gentle refusal is mistaken for attitude. You don't intend to hurt anyone, nor do you try to assert dominance. And yet somehow you make people cautious around you. In a world where being agreeable is the standard, your refusal to please everyone becomes intimidating. When you say no without explanation, they call it arrogance. When you remain silent during small talk, they think you're judging. When you live by your own principles and refuse to blend in, you make others feel unsafe. Not because you're a threat, but because you reflect everything they're trying to escape within themselves. And then you begin to wonder, is something wrong with me? But no, the truth is this. You're not what scares them. They're afraid of themselves when they stand in front of you. In this video, we'll uncover 11 signs that you carry a kind of inner power that quietly makes others cautious. Not because you seek to provoke them, but because you live too honestly, too clearly, too solidly in a world that's grown comfortable with being vague and agreeable. Stoicism doesn't teach you to please others. It teaches you to be still enough that you no longer need anyone to understand you. 1. You have boundaries that cannot be shaken. People often think boundaries are there to keep others out, but in truth, they're how you stop yourself from disappearing. There was a time when you said yes to everything, not because you wanted to, but because you feared disappointing others. You smiled when you were exhausted, listened when your mind was already empty, helped even when you knew you were being taken advantage of. Until one day you realized no one truly appreciated your sacrifice. They just saw it as part of your default self. And the moment you started saying no, the moment you walked away from what drained you, the world suddenly treated you like a rebel. Those who were used to your constant availability became uncomfortable. They asked why you changed, why you were no longer sweet like before. But they didn't realize that sweetness was once a mask hiding your wounds. When you began protecting your energy, when you turned down what didn't fit, they didn't see someone learning to love themselves. They saw someone no longer easy to control. And that's why they became wary. Boundaries aren't walls, they're mirrors. They reflect the lack of discipline in others and force them to realize not everyone is willing to tolerate everything. Someone who can say no calmly, without anger or explanation, is someone who cannot be manipulated. And to those who are used to leaning on others, that's terrifying. They don't understand that your strength doesn't come from arrogance, but from every crack you've survived. Every time you were used, every time you were dismissed, every time you smiled while wanting to vanish, those moments forged the steel inside you now. Epictetus once said, "Anyone who can anger you owns you." In the same way, anyone who makes you feel guilty for protecting yourself also controls you. You understand this, so you no longer apologize for drawing boundaries. You no longer explain why you didn't show up, no longer punish yourself for turning down an invitation. Because you've learned that kindness isn't about always being available, it's about knowing when to step back so you don't lose yourself. People say you're cold, distant, selfish. But within your stillness lies a refined compassion. You don't want to hurt anyone, but you also won't let anyone keep hurting you. This isn't detachment, it's growth. Because sometimes loving yourself means being willing to disappoint others. And once you learn that, you no longer need to shout to prove your power. Your silent firmness alone makes people keep their distance, not out of fear, but because they realize they cannot control someone who's learned how to guard their own peace. 2. You don't need anyone to confirm what you already know. Some people only act when praised, only believe in their worth when others agree. But then there are those who live by a different principle. They don't ask if they're right, because they've already answered that in the silence within. They don't need others to validate what they already know, and that unshakable certainty makes many uncomfortable. In a world driven by likes, compliments, and polite nods, a person calm enough to stand alone looks like someone arrogant enough to need no one. You used to seek approval. Every decision had to go through countless opinions. Every idea needed a green light before you could act. But after being doubted, after following advice only to be abandoned in failure, you realized not everyone has the vision to understand the path you chose. From that moment, you began listening more to the voice within than the noise outside. You learned to make decisions from clarity, not consensus. You no longer needed applause for what you already knew was right, because your inner conviction had grown larger than your fear of being misunderstood. That calm doesn't come from pride. It comes from inner discipline, from walking through self-doubt enough times to finally make choices without needing approval. You don't dismiss other people's opinions, but you're no longer dependent on them. You can listen, reflect, but the final choice is still yours. And that leaves people unsettled, because they're used to finding certainty in the eyes of others, and when they meet someone who doesn't need that gaze, they no longer know where they stand. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Stand upright without being held up." That's the mark of someone who's built pillars inside themselves, not leaning on the world for support. And the irony is, when you no longer seek validation, you become someone others want validation from. They begin to question their own dependence, because standing before you is someone who doesn't ask for permission to exist. And so, without a single word of judgment, you still leave them shaken. True self-command doesn't shout. It doesn't wear a forced strength. It's a quiet steadiness, but strong enough to disturb those who've never truly decided for themselves. When you no longer need validation, you don't become lonely, you become free. And in a world addicted to consensus, freedom always creates distance, not because you push people away, but because they've never learned to stand alone like you have. 3. You're comfortable with silence. Some people fear silence the way they fear the dark. They fill every gap with words, with awkward laughter, with stories that go nowhere just to escape the stillness that might reveal something within they're not ready to face. But you're different. You stay still when others begin to fidget. You stay quiet, not because you have nothing to say, but because you know not everything needs to be said to be real. Sometimes, silence is the most complete way to be present. They don't understand how you can sit in a room without your phone, without scrolling, without making small talk, just observing, just listening. To them, it looks like loneliness. To you, it feels like returning. Because you've learned, someone who can't sit quietly with themselves will never fully show up in any relationship. They come together out of need, fear, addiction to noise. You come from fullness, without needing to fill the space. You show others that a person calm in silence is the hardest to shake. Seneca once wrote, "We are never alone if we enjoy the company of ourselves." And you are the embodiment of that. You don't fear silence, you fear losing peace by constantly speaking just to be seen. There are moments you choose not to reply, not to comment, not to argue. Not out of weakness or defeat, but because you realize sometimes the strongest move is to prove nothing at all. The more people speak, the more they reveal their weaknesses. But you, in your silence, uphold your boundary without needing a wall. That's why you make others uneasy. They don't know what you're thinking. They feel empty when their usual feedback loop is missing. Your calmness highlights their restlessness. Your silence makes the noise in their own minds louder than ever. And instead of seeing it as a chance to reflect, they blame you for being distant, cold, hard to read. But you don't change yourself to make others comfortable. You've chosen a different path, living truthfully, even if it costs the illusion of being pleasant. In a world full of noise, silence is the loudest voice of the one who knows themselves. It's not used to overpower, it's used to remain awake. And only those truly solid within can walk into that silence without retreat. You don't avoid silence, you walk through it. Because on the other side isn't emptiness, but a power without words, a presence that doesn't need to be amplified to be felt. 4. You don't easily believe something just because someone said it. There's a kind of silence not born from hesitation, but from watching whether there's any substance behind the words. While many are swept up by the charm of eloquence, you stand back half a step, not out of cynicism, but to avoid being led too quickly by things unproven. You don't easily believe something just because someone said it, not because you lack trust, but because you've trusted the wrong people and learned that not everyone who speaks well lives accordingly. They speak of sincerity, you observe their actions when no one's watching. They speak of responsibility, you wait to see if they keep their word when the audience disappears. You don't need promises. You don't need long speeches about values because you know those with principles don't prove them with words. What's truly solid doesn't scream. What's truly trustworthy doesn't need emphasis. That's why you quietly verify rather than blindly trust, and that alone makes people realize they can't easily fool you. In an age where quick agreement is seen as friendliness, your slowness is mistaken for coldness. But you're not here to please, you're here to see clearly. You've had enough of sweet words and sugar-coated compliments. Now, you no longer need the mask of politeness. You need the truth. And if you must choose between a painful truth and a comforting lie, you choose truth. Not to hurt others, but to protect yourself from the default dishonesty of this world. Marcus Aurelius once said, "If someone speaks of you, let it not disturb you unless you know it to be true." You've etched those words into yourself because you've been hurt by words not meant to bring understanding, but to manipulate emotions. From that, you've learned to listen calmly without reacting, without easily agreeing. You don't oppose, but you don't nod on autopilot. You know that intelligence isn't in what you say next, but in choosing not to swallow everything you hear. That's why you make people uncomfortable. Those used to being trusted too quickly, those who use words to control find you hard to handle. You force them to be clearer, more transparent, because you don't play the social game they're used to. You don't expose them with accusations, but with non-reaction, just calmly looking straight at them. And in that gaze, there's no judgment, only a quiet warning. I'm listening, but I don't rush to believe. Trust, for you, isn't built on how much someone talks, but how they live when no one's watching. You're not easy to convince, but when you trust, it's with deep respect. Because before trusting others, you've learned never to betray your own intuition. And that's what makes you hard to manipulate, hard to sway a quiet strength that makes people cautious when facing you. 5. You have principles so clear they cannot be negotiated. Some people live to please every side, while others choose to stand still in the storm of opinions. They're not loud. They don't need to prove anything. They don't crave applause, but within them lies one thing no one dares to cross. Principles. Not the rigid kind used to control others, but moral boundaries sharpened in silence, protected by experience, and preserved through honesty with oneself. You are that kind of person, and that alone earns you labels like stubborn, rigid, or inflexible. But the truth is, you simply refuse to be bent by vague things disguised as temporary emotions. You don't live by what feels good today or where the wind blows tomorrow. If you've made a commitment, you keep it. If you've made a choice, you don't shift with emotions or societal pressure. You don't act out of fear of rejection, nor do you reject out of fear of being hurt. Others see you as unshakable and call it coldness, but you understand this. The ones who change too easily are the ones others can never truly trust. You're not afraid of being misunderstood. What you fear is living a life where you no longer recognize yourself. In a world where values are often traded for convenience, the one with principles becomes a stranger. When someone invites you to go against your personal code, even in the smallest way, you don't need time to consider. Your answer is simple. I won't do that. No need to explain. No need to justify. Not because you're trying to appear moral, but because you're unwilling to pay with your self-respect. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Don't live as if you have thousands of years ahead. Every decision defines who you are." You don't need others to agree with your principles because you know, if you live without them, everything else becomes an act. Others will try to sway you with emotion, with reasons, with sympathy. They'll say flexibility is maturity, that being reasonable means compromise. But you don't compromise just to appear grown up. Because you know, maturity isn't the ability to yield. It's knowing what's worth standing firm for. And sometimes, refusing something that seems trivial is exactly how you keep your moral foundation from silently cracking. You don't live to make others comfortable. You live so that at the end of the day, when all noise fades, you can look into the mirror without avoiding your own gaze. And because of that, you become inconvenient to those who are used to living vaguely. They can't define you. They can't manipulate you. And that makes them keep their distance, not because you threaten them, but because you force them to ask, "What am I truly living for?" Principles don't make you stand out. They make you impossible to dissolve. And in a world full of drifters, that alone makes you different. 6. You speak the truth, even when it's hard to hear. Some truths are like dull blades. They don't cut deep enough to destroy, but sharp enough to stop someone in their tracks. You don't speak to hurt, nor do you stay silent to be liked. You simply choose truth as it is and let others decide whether they're ready to face it. In a world where words are sugar-coated to keep the peace, you are one of the rare few willing to say what everyone's thinking, but no one dares to admit. And that makes you a thorn to those who've grown used to the comfort of pretending. You've faced the choice many times. Stay silent to please others, or speak up to keep your own conscience at ease. And you always chose the latter, even knowing it might cost you relationships that once felt close. But you understand that a relationship that can't survive truth will eventually collapse under the weight of its lies. You don't speak to preach. You speak so you won't betray your own values. Seneca once wrote, "A true friend isn't someone who makes you comfortable, but someone who makes you better." And to help someone become better, sometimes you have to be the only one who dares say what they don't want to hear. The truth you speak isn't a weapon. It's a warning, a way to awaken, a reminder that life is too short to keep going down the wrong path just because no one dares to say it out loud. But you never speak without compassion. You don't throw truth at others just to prove you're right. You choose your timing, your tone, and always ask yourself one thing before speaking. Will this truly help them? And if the answer is yes, you speak even if it means being pushed away. People may call you too blunt, too rigid, or lacking in tact. But what they really fear isn't your words. It's the mirror within your words, where they see their own misdirection, weakness, or insincerity laid bare. You're not attacking them. You simply refuse to join the collective game of deception, and that makes you uncomfortable in their eyes, but unforgettable when they finally find the courage to face themselves. Telling the truth won't make you beloved, but it will keep you from being disrespected. And you accept that price because you'd rather live alone with your integrity than among crowds with words that aren't your own. To you, truth isn't a choice, it's a responsibility. One you don't need assigned to you, but one you carry as an inseparable part of your character. 7. You don't need someone beside you to feel whole. Some people always need someone around to feel that life has meaning. They fear the silence in the room, the emptiness between appointments, the mirror of their own presence when no one's watching. But you are different. You don't need anyone to feel whole. Not because you despise connection, but because you've learned the deepest connection is the one with your own soul. In solitude, you don't find fear, you find freedom. A freedom no one gives and no one can take away. You've walked through days with no one checking in, weekend nights with no invitations, and milestones that no one witnessed but you. At first, it felt empty. Then, it became peace. When there's no one to distract you, you begin to hear your inner voice. When there's no one to hold you up, you begin to stand on your own. And from that, you understand. Happiness isn't about having someone next to you, but being able to walk alone without feeling incomplete. This world doesn't know what to do with someone who is self-contained, because such people can't be controlled, can't be persuaded, and can't be manipulated. You don't need to be invited to enjoy yourself. You don't need praise to feel confident. You don't need anyone's validation to believe in your worth. Your internal self-sufficiency makes others feel redundant, and sometimes that makes them stay away. But you don't feel sad, because you don't live to be needed. You live to be free. Marcus Aurelius would spend hours alone in quiet dialogue with himself, writing his thoughts as if each line were a silent step back toward his essence. He knew, as you do, that those who can't endure solitude can never truly connect with others. Because if you don't know how to be with yourself, how can you be with anyone else without leaning on them? You don't avoid connection, you just don't depend on it. When you choose to be with someone, it's because you want to, not because you need to. And that's what gives you dignity. The self-sufficient are not lonely, they are selective. They don't chase, they observe. And that quiet strength makes them both distant and magnetic to those who've never learned to be alone. You don't resist the world, you simply don't let it decide when you feel complete. And because of that, even when walking alone, you move as if you carry a kingdom inside. A kingdom with no audience, no fireworks, just you. Calm enough to keep the fire, and alert enough to never hand over the key. 8. You don't panic when everything falls apart. When others begin to lose their composure, when shouting drowns out thought, when frantic eyes search for something to cling to, you remain silent. Not because you don't feel the pressure, but because you refuse to let it dictate your choices. While the world around you spirals into chaos, you stand like a cold stone in the waves, unmoved, unshaken, simply observing, then acting when necessary. You've seen capable people fall apart over a single unexpected event. You've seen the loudest voices crumble first when trouble hits. You understand that panic has never saved anyone from hardship. It only binds them tighter in fear and robs them of timely responses. But you don't rush to explain. Don't act out of urgency, because you know calmness is the first advantage in any crisis. Stoicism doesn't teach us to suppress emotion. It teaches us to choose our response. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens that hurts us, but how we interpret it." You've engraved that into every tough moment. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening?" you ask, "What must I do now?" Instead of sinking into anger or blame, you keep your breath steady and face reality. That's not apathy, that's inner strength. Once, when a project at your company ran into serious trouble, the whole team panicked, running around, searching for someone to blame. You didn't say much. You opened your laptop, reviewed the data, listed the options, and began reorganizing the plan. You weren't the smartest person there, nor the boss, but people started looking to you because in the middle of the storm, you were the only one who hadn't been swept away. That composure didn't come naturally, it came from nights of failing alone, mornings dragging yourself up with no motivation left. Calmness is not lack of feeling, it's the ability to direct it. It's knowing everything is falling apart, but still choosing to stand rather than collapse. And that choice alone makes people cautious, not because you pretend to be strong, but because they realize you don't have to pretend. Your calmness isn't a mask, it's the ground you forge through fire, stable even when the world beneath trembles. 9. You don't speak ill of those who aren't present. Not everyone needs to raise their voice to feel powerful. Many feel empowered simply by whispering behind someone's back. The seemingly harmless conversations at cafes, around office desks, or during walks home are often where people most easily abandon their integrity, but not you. Not because you're too strict, but because you understand. Saying something another person can't respond to is a form of cowardly violence, and you don't use words to attack someone who isn't there to defend themselves. You've been invited into circles of trust where people whisper about others' mistakes as a way to create a sense of intimacy, but you don't add to the gossip. You don't laugh along. You stay silent, and that silence unsettles the room. They think you're arrogant, distant, maybe even condescending. But what truly makes them uncomfortable isn't your presence, it's the fact that your principle exposes their own moral decline. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Speak of others as if they were present and could hear every word." That's not just hollow moral advice. It's a rule to preserve your own integrity before judging others. You're not perfect, but you refuse the easy habit of putting someone down to lift yourself up. And because of that, you're not welcome in groups that need a scapegoat, a name to toss around for amusement or blame. You know this deeply. If someone can speak ill of others in their absence, they'll just as easily do it to you the moment you turn your back. Loyalty isn't measured by vows, it's measured by how you protect others, even when they're not there. Silence is not weakness, it's a conscious choice. A decision not to sink others just to earn a favor with the crowd. A choice to keep your dignity rather than trade it for artificial harmony. You don't need anyone's approval for that principle. Because you know, someone who can't control their tongue will never command true self-respect. And someone who can't preserve respect in someone's absence doesn't deserve trust in their presence. That quiet consistency is what sets you apart. Not flashy, not self-righteous, just someone who understands one truth. Once spoken, your words become the most honest reflection of your character. 10. You don't complain. You act. You don't complain. Not because your life is easier than others, but because you've learned that complaining does nothing but distance you from action. You don't see venting about circumstances as a way to feel better. You don't repeat lines like, "if only," or "why me," as rituals of self-pity. Instead, you look at the problem, accept it as part of life, and ask, "What will I do next?" You don't deny pain, but you refuse to let it become an excuse to remain stuck. While others are busy ranting about how bad the times are, you're quietly adjusting your course. When they blame their boss, the economy, or the weather, you sit down and sort through what's in your control and what isn't. And then you get to work. No grand gestures, no bold declarations, just hands and discipline instead of words and resentment. Seneca once warned, "Complaints are useless if you don't intend to change anything." For you, that's not just philosophy, it's a way of life. You've realized many people don't actually want change, they just want someone to listen so they can feel like justified victims. But you don't seek that kind of sympathy. You'd rather be alone in action than comforted in stagnation. Because you know, the more you complain, the more you sink into a sense of helplessness. But the more you act, the more you reclaim your power from circumstance. Not everyone understands that choice. Some think you're cold, insensitive, even harsh. But those who live inside the loop of constant complaining, waiting for a miracle or someone's pity, are the ones who feel threatened by you, because your presence forces them to confront a hard truth. Maybe they've grown used to talking more than doing. You don't reject complaining out of moral superiority. You avoid it because it doesn't work. And because you know that too well, you don't waste a single second repeating the pain that's already happened. Pain, when handled with action, becomes experience. But if relived daily through words, it only makes people re-experience their helplessness over and over again. You choose differently, and that choice makes you the kind of person people can't share complaints with, but the kind of person who makes them ask, if I acted like them, would my life be different? 11. You accept yourself without performing. Some people spend their entire lives at war with themselves. They wake up every day with a checklist of flaws to fix, imperfections to hide, roles to perform. They learn how to smile on cue, say just enough to be liked, and act confident even when they're completely hollow inside. But not you. Not because you're perfect, but because you've stopped trying to become someone else just to be accepted. You used to live like them. You tried changing your posture, your voice, even your dreams just to meet someone else's expectations. But then you realized, external approval can never fill the internal void if you keep rejecting yourself. From that point, you began a quiet journey, learning to face yourself without judgment, naming your wounds without hiding them, loving the parts of you the world calls not enough, because you were too tired of asking for permission to be yourself. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Love whatever fate has placed in your path and make it yours." For you, that began with loving who you are, even when no one else does. No more pretending to be busy just to feel worthy. No more buying things to impress people who don't care. No more blaming yourself for not fitting the daily parade of success templates. You began to filter. Keep what's real, release what forces you to perform. That acceptance doesn't make you lazy or stagnant. On the contrary, it lets you grow from a place of stability, not from the fear of being not enough. You still learn, improve, and stay disciplined, but you don't do it to be loved. You do it because you love yourself enough to keep evolving. That's the difference between growth born from self-respect and growth driven by shame. But that calmness makes others uneasy. In a world fueled by comparison and feelings of inadequacy, someone who's at peace with themselves always seems out of place. Your presence makes them face a hard question. Why can't I be that okay with myself? And instead of searching for the answer, they choose to criticize. But you remain unmoved because you know the freest person isn't the one most loved. It's the one who doesn't need to perform to be loved. And when you live that way, you don't need anyone on your side to feel whole. Because the most important companion is you, every single day. There were phases in my life when isolation arrived quietly. No one pushed me away. No one hurt me, but I began to feel a growing distance. Not because I did something wrong, but because I started living truthfully. I declined social invitations that no longer held meaning. I stopped pretending to be easygoing in hollow conversations. I no longer softened my edges just to be considered approachable. And little by little, the circles around me thinned, yet the core within me grew stronger. I used to believe that becoming stronger would earn me more respect, but the truth was the opposite. When you're not easily hurt, not easily swayed, not easily manipulated, people stop finding you endearing. They see you as distant, they tread carefully around you, they question your motives. Not because you've done something wrong, but because your stability forces them to confront their own fragility. And most people don't like that. But in the end, I learned this. You don't have to dim your essence just to make others comfortable. You don't need permission to exist as someone who can't be controlled. You only need to live truthfully honest enough to connect, firm enough to stay whole, and quiet enough not to prove anything. If the reminders in this video reflect any part of who you are, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next content. Because sometimes, the only thing you need is a quiet reminder that there's nothing wrong with not being like the majority. See you in the next video.